If you've been following this conversation, then you already know something is broken. We've talked about micromanagement. We've talked about disengagement. We've talked about high achievers quietly pulling back before they ever quit. And if you've experienced this firsthand, or you've seen it happen around you, you already understand this. This is not a motivation problem. This is not a talent problem. This is a leadership problem. So now the real question becomes, what should leadership actually look like? Because calling out dysfunction is easy, but defining the standard, that's where most people get quiet. It's easy to say, micromanagement is bad. Leaders need to do better. But what does better actually mean? What does that look like in real time, in meetings, in decision making, and how leaders show up every single day? Because if we don't define that clearly, what happens is this. Leaders think they've improved, but their behavior, it hasn't actually changed. And high performers can tell the difference immediately. Now let's get to it. High achievers don't need hovering, mixed signals, or empty praise. They don't need someone checking in every hour. They don't need constant validation. They don't need leadership that feels inconsistent depending on the day. What they need is much more foundational. They need trust. They need clarity. They need autonomy. And they need leaders who understand how to support performance without suffocating it. Now that last point matters because a lot of leaders think they're being supportive, but what they're actually doing is interfering. Now let's go back to micromanagement for a second, because micromanagement doesn't just frustrate people. It communicates something very specific. It says, I don't trust how you think, not just what you do, how you think. And once that message is sent consistently, everything changes. The way people show up changes. The way they communicate changes. The level of effort they're willing to give changes. Not because their capability changed, but because the environment did. I've had conversations with professionals across industries, education, government, corporate, and this is a consistent theme. High performers don't struggle with doing the work. They struggle with navigating leadership that doesn't trust them to do it well. And this is exactly why high performers disengage quietly. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. They adjust first. They stop overextending. They stop volunteering ideas. They stop pushing for excellence. Here's the part that leaders miss. That shift doesn't happen overnight. It happens gradually. One moment of being overlooked, one instance of inconsistent feedback, one too many times of having their work unnecessarily picked apart, until they reach a point where they decide, this level of effort is no longer worth it. And once they reach that point, it's very difficult to reverse. So let's stop circling the problem, because at this point, we already know what's broken. Micromanagement is happening. High performers are disengaging, and a lot of leaders already feel the pressure from above. Let's be honest. Some leaders feel like they're stuck in a system that they didn't create, deadlines they didn't set, metrics they didn't design, expectations they don't fully control. So what happens? They default to control. Not because they want to micromanagement, but because it feels like the only lever that they have. But here's the part we need to be honest about. Even inside a broken system, how you lead still matters. You may not be able to change everything, but you can change how your team experiences you. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you 5 ways leaders can support not micromanage high performers, even with imperfect systems. Because if you get this right, you don't just protect performance, you protect your people. Number one, trust that is consistent. Trust can't be situational. You don't get to trust someone when things are going well, and then withdraw that trust the moment something goes wrong. That creates instability. High achievers need to know you trust their judgment, you trust their approach, you trust their ability to figure things out. Because if they feel like trust can be taken away at any moment, they'll start playing it safe. And high performers don't thrive in environments where they feel like they have to second guess themselves constantly. Number two, clarity instead of control. A lot of micromanagement is rooted in one thing: lack of clarity. When leaders are unclear, they over-involve themselves. They insert themselves into decisions. They overcorrect. They create unnecessary layers of communication. But clarity fixes that. Clear expectations, clear priorities, clear outcomes. When those are in place, you don't need to hover, because everyone understands what success looks like. Number three, autonomy with accountability. This is where many leaders get it wrong. They want results, but they don't want to release control. You can't have both. If you want someone to own the outcome, you have to allow them to own the process. Otherwise, what you're really doing is this: holding someone accountable for decisions they didn't fully get to make. And that creates frustration very fast. High achievers want accountability, but it has to be paired with autonomy. Number four, recognition that actually means something. Let's talk about recognition, because this is another area where leaders miss the mark. High achievers don't need constant praise. They don't need "great job" repeated every week with no context. What they value is recognition that is specific, recognition that is tied to impact, recognition that shows you understand what they contributed, because generic praise feels empty. And high performers can tell when something is performative versus meaningful. Number five, leaders who remove obstacles. This is one of the most overlooked aspects of leadership. Your role is not to add complexity. Your role is to reduce it, to remove friction, to clear those roadblocks, to make it easier for your team to execute at a high level. If your involvement is consistently creating more work instead of enabling progress, that's not leadership. That's interference. Now here's the real challenge. If you're in a leadership position, ask yourself this: can you step back without feeling like you're losing control? Because that's where many leaders struggle. They equate involvement with value. They believe that if they are not constantly engaged in every detail, that they're not leading effectively. But strong leadership is not about being everywhere. It's about being intentional. It's about knowing where your presence actually adds value and where it doesn't, and having the discipline to step back when it doesn't. This entire conversation comes down to one thing: high achievers do not disengage because they can't handle the work. They disengage because leadership makes excellence harder than it should be. And once that happens consistently, they don't just adjust, they eventually leave. So I'll leave you with this: what do high achievers need most from leadership? You can drop it in the comments. If you haven't watched the earlier videos in this series on micromanagement and disengagement, go back and watch those next, because this conversation builds on that. Thank you so much for watching.